Good to see everybody tonight. Passage that we read was in Matthew 19 and the first 12 verses there. You know, Jesus talks about divorce and remarriage a number of times. In Matthew's account alone, he talks about it 4 times. In Matthew 5, in Matthew 19, in Matthew 14 with John the Baptist, and of course here in Matthew, we see this in Matthew 19 as well, and then in Mark's account 2 different times, Luke's account in Luke 16. So there's a number of times where the Lord talks about this. And what has always been to me as we look at these things is just that when Jesus in Matthew 19, as you noticed in that passage, when Jesus said that whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery, the response of the apostles was quite unique. The apostles turned around and said, whoa, if that's the case of a man with a woman, it's just better not to get married. If we can't dump her after about 10 years, why would we get married? It's just a very interesting response, which gives you a picture of how culturally infected, if you will, that the disciples were, the apostles were, and how that this was a shock to them. They had been living all their lives, and every generation before them had been living their lives all the way back, even to the days of Malachi at least. They had been living with the idea that when you got tired of your wife, you let her burn the biscuits one morning and say, that does it. We're done. There we go. So cook your own hot cereal. There you go. That'd be the way that'd be. Anyway, you see that over and over again. So we're going to talk today. We talked last time about one of the most common beliefs about divorce and remarriage, and that is if you divorced and remarried prior to becoming a Christian, then when you became a Christian, everything started fresh. And that's something when I first started preaching, I was just a kid and I didn't know any better. And I just figured, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Nobody ever told me anything different. I do not believe in the 22 years up to that time that I was going to church, any preacher ever preached a lesson or taught a class on divorce and remarriage, which you would consider pretty sad since I was there every time. But that just was never talked about. And so I just naturally grabbed that conclusion until somebody pointed out to me in reading Matthew 19 that Jesus said this was a law from the beginning. Well, that changes everything. If anybody came from Adam and Eve, this is a law. This is the law from the very beginning. It's a law for everybody. It's not a Christian law. It's not a law under Christ, and not ever before. Jesus said in Matthew 19 and 6 through verse 8, from the beginning, it was never so that a man was allowed to divorce his wife and remarry. And then he goes on to say, except for the cause of sexual immorality, as you see there in verse 9. So we'll do some discussion here. I want to make sure you're able to ask questions about this. Since I'm going to be presenting some things that you may never have heard before, I'll have to present some of these things and then see how you feel about it, and making sure you understand these things. Keep in mind the purposes of this kind of discussion is at least threefold here. As Ephesians 4 says, we want to come to the unity of the faith, knowledge of the Son of God to a perfect man. We don't be tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine, and there are a lot of winds and doctrines on this particular subject. And we certainly want to be equipped and prepared so that we can actually discuss this intelligently with somebody that we're teaching. So all of those things are vitally important, even if it's not the subject that you say, well, that's not the most fun subject to necessarily talk about. Yeah, but very necessary. Lots of churches have divided over this. So I want to give, and if we have time, we'll look at just 3 final, more modern views of how to understand the text in Matthew 19. We may only get through 2 of them. If we do, that'll be fine. The last one is a little more subtle, but we'll talk at least about these first two. All right, so a very common view that rose up about mid-1980s was when I was first confronted with this view. In fact, a preacher called me up and said, I would like to come and spend 3 days with you and see if I can convince you on this view. I said, well, come on. And 3 days later, I said, you have not convinced me. In fact, you've convinced me even more that that's not right. So anyway, here's basically the view. A spouse who puts away for sexual immorality is free to marry. I made a mistake. The view I just mentioned is the next view we're going to talk about. This one is as old as about the early 1970s, something like that. So most of you remember that, especially those like Jerry and stuff. He's been around forever. That'd be true. So anyway, here's the idea. You're in a marriage. You're the one who cheated. Let's just take the man, for example. You're the one who cheated on your wife, and your wife is maybe takes a while to get aware of it. And I'd like to tell you just a real life situation. This is an actual situation. So, woman happily married to her husband. He comes home one day and says, "By the way, I just filed today. I've been seeing another woman for the last 8 years." Okay, now how about, you think everything is fine, you think everything is great, but he says, I've been seeing another woman for 8 years. I finally have decided that I'm done, and I'm going to go off and marry her. And I've already filed for divorce, so that's taken care of. I'm putting you away so I can marry somebody else. All right, so the view is that once this woman then said, well, in that case, I'm divorcing you for the cause of sexual immorality and putting him away. Once that happened, then he can now lawfully remarry the woman he's been having an affair with for 8 years. Okay, that is an extremely common view. And here's how. Let's see how you do with this argument. And I'm giving you nearly exact quote argument. I've been confronted with it many, many times. So here's the argument. The idea is that if you put away your spouse for the cause of sexual immorality, are you bound to him or her anymore? All right, so this woman, let's say, puts away the man who's been committing adultery for 8 years, puts him away. Is he bound to her anymore? Is she bound to him? How would he answer? Well, that's a pretty good point here by Wayne. That's not the question you should be asking. And Wayne is exactly right. But here's how this goes. How would you answer that? As an attorney would say if you were on the stand, just answer the question, sir. Do not, just answer the question. That would be the way that'd be. So you put your spouse away for sexual immorality. She cheated on you or whatever, vice versa. Is she bound to you anymore? Are you bound to her anymore? You're scared to answer, aren't you? Yep. Oh, you can't actually say that you put him away, that you're not bound anymore. I mean, what if I put away a wife for the cause of sexual immorality, and I'm allowed, according to Matthew 19:9, to marry again? Am I bound to 2 women? No, I can be bound to 2 women. I'm not bound to her anymore. I'm bound to the new wife, right? So we're not bound. She's not bound to me. I'm not bound to her. All right. So
we could probably agree that they're not bound anymore. The question is, are they allowed to rebind?
okay. The question is, yeah, can even the one put away for sexual immorality marry again. Is there authority for that? So here's how the second argument goes, the second part of the argument. Once you've stepped into the trap, so to speak, of saying, no, you're not bound to her, she's not bound to you, all of that, well, then having been put away, he or she is no longer bound to you, is no longer your spouse, then he or she can marry without committing adultery, since adultery is defined as sexual relations with the spouse of another. So once you put away somebody for the cause of sexual immorality, well then they're not bound to you anymore. They're not bound anymore, so why can't they marry again? So that is the argument. Many debates on that for all of you who never visited California. from the 70s on, a lot of debates on that, sat in on many of them and participated in a number of these debates as well. So at any rate, there's the view. You can see that's a little bit of a touchy thing. Go ahead, Alan.
So the result is, if I sin, then I can get out of this marriage.
Well, you've sinned, but I mean, you can lose your soul for that sin. But
sin is the result of the unbinding.
Yeah,
and they're saying that's justified.
Well, they're not saying the sexual immorality was justified. Obviously not. But if you did and you got put away for that cause, then you can go ahead and marry the woman you were having relations with, or somebody else. You're not bound anymore because you were, quote unquote, put away. Yeah, it doesn't sound real tasteful, does it? No, not exactly, but that is the view. Typically,
you can steal the car. You're caught stealing the car,
yeah.
So I get to keep the car.
Yeah, well, once I don't own
Once
it,
I repented of stealing the car.
I guess I don't. That it gets complicated. But anyway, I think that's a pretty strong argument. That's a pretty strong argument, even though it's not very tasteful, doesn't sound too good, all that. But it's that's many debates were held on that. So I'm going to suggest some problems with the view, some of which has already been brought up. God is the one who gives authority for marriage, and we know He gives a positive authority in each case. He authorized one man, and one woman to marry for life. Okay. We would go, what passage would you go to show that? Say Genesis. That's exactly right. Jesus quotes Genesis. Genesis chapter 2:24. A man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. If that passage weren't there, what if God just said, I create male, I create female, hope you all get along? Well then, there's no authority for marriage. He has to give us authority to do the things we do. There has to be that authority, and so He gave that authority. He also has authorized a person to remarry if his or her spouse dies. You see that in Romans 7, 1 through 3. A man is bound to his wife so long as he lives. But once they die, you're no longer bound. You're released from the law of your husband or the law of your wife in each of these cases. And 1 Corinthians 7:39 shows the same thing. Thirdly, He's authorized a person to remarry who has put his or her spouse away for the cause of sexual immorality, which is our passage in Matthew 19:9. All right, but then here's the question, and this has already been brought up. Where's the authority for a person to remarry who has been put away for sexual immorality? He never gives any statement like that at all. He does not in the text say, oh, well, once you've been put away for any cause. The Bible doesn't teach you can remarry no matter why you were put away. If you're put away and even sexual immorality is not there, there's nothing in the Scripture that allows you to remarry. Luke 16:18, Jesus said, whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery, and whoever marries the one who's been put away commits adultery. So He hits both sides of it. So a couple deciding, well, let's just agree to get a divorce. Okay, you've agreed to get a divorce. Neither of you can remarry, according to Luke 16:18. So that puts that there. So this is the first problem, is you don't have some direct authority from this. You're just making an assumption that they can because you've gone through some some gymnastics here with this. I would suggest something else as well. Look at Matthew 5, verse 31 and 32. In that particular text, you will notice what he says. He says, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Notice what Jesus said there. He said, it is also said. He didn't say, it was also written in the law of Moses. So what would that indicate when Jesus said, it was also said? What's that indicate? Pardon? The source was not God. That's right. He uses that phrase 5 times in chapter 5 of Matthew. And each time he is giving the rabbinical interpretation of a text, not the text itself. Like in Matthew, if Matthew's quoting a text, which he does many, many times, he says, it was written, or it has been written, not it has been said. So these 5 times in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, Jesus says it was said. He is giving a rabbinical interpretation. The rabbinical interpretation in this particular case would be of what text? We talked about this a few weeks ago. What text would the rabbis have been misusing from what Jesus said from the Old Testament? Deuteronomy. That's right. Deuteronomy 24 is the text. And obviously, Jesus is telling us right here, their interpretation is wrong. It is incorrect to say, whoever divorces his wife, all you got to do is give her a certificate of divorce, and you are scot-free, because Jesus says this. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So according to Deuteronomy 24, when you read that text, when a man put away his wife, and it says, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and Jesus is saying here, if that's so, you in putting her away have caused her to commit adultery. So it's like shock to the man who thought he could just put her away and be free from any sin. And Jesus says, well, not only has she sinned, but you've sinned. You've caused her adultery and the adultery of whoever marries her. So you see in the text, that last part that I've highlighted, whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So you cannot say, oh, well, I was put away for the cause of fornication, and since I've been put away, then I can marry again. Well, actually, he says whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Questions? So there's that, yeah.
It applies both ways. The man who put the woman away also he remarried.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have everybody sinning here in this particular case. He's put her away without any legal cause, and obviously he can't turn around and say, well, I'm free because he just caused her to commit adultery. She's not free. The man who marries her not free. You've got 3 different individuals in this text who the Pharisees would argue would have a right to remarry, and none of them have a right to remarry. That's the problem. Okay? So you notice that. Let me give you one other text, and that'd be in Hosea 2, verse 2. So the argument in this view is, well, once you've been divorced, once you've been put away, then it's impossible to commit adultery because you don't have a spouse anymore. Understand that argument? I've been put away because I committed sexual immorality, and once I've been put away, then I don't have a spouse anymore, so remarrying, I wouldn't be committing adultery, because adultery is the unlawful sexual relations of the spouse of another. Well, not according to this text. In this text, God has already divorced Israel. And he says, plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. All right, just start there. Is Israel bound to God? Is God bound to Israel? There's that argument. Well, then she can't commit adultery, right? No. He says, plead with her that she put away her whoring from her face and her adultery from between her breasts. So he clearly still calls her an adulteress, even though he said, I'm done with her, she's not my wife, I'm not her husband. So God doesn't just go, oh, that's the way it is. Now let me suggest to you, there are covenants with God, and there are even covenants today. When sports figures, let's take a football player who plays for the Tennessee Titans, and he gets all miffed because he signed a contract 5 years ago that paid him so much money, and he gets to the third year of the contract and he goes, other people are making more money than me. I'm not playing until you give me more money. And you've seen this before, haven't you? And the ownership says, toodaloo. We're not paying you more. You signed a contract. We signed a contract. We're not redoing the contract. That's it. And the player says, then I'm not playing. Well, guess what? You can't go play for Pittsburgh. You can't go play for the Rams. You can't play. You are limited. You can't do it. And guess what? The Tennessee Titans do not have to pay you either. Now it's got one side of the contract still in force, even though you left and even though you said, I'm not playing. Part of the contract, you cannot just simply break that because you said, I don't want to play with you anymore. And it's the same thing here. You may have violated your marriage contract and all that, but that does not mean God has freed you from the relationship that He has with that law. Who bound you? God did. This is not just a binding between two. By the way, that's the way that argument tries to go. They try to make just a horizontal binding between a husband and wife and act like it's not triangular, like God is not involved here. And so they'll go, just the two of you are bound, therefore cut the line. He's not bound to you anymore, she's not bound to him anymore, therefore you can remarry. Well, you forgot about God in this situation and what He says about it. And I'd say that's the problem with that particular view. I will suggest to you, though, when you're in the trenches with this view and talking to the people, and I have good friends. I'm not sure if they're still alive, frankly, but I had good friends in California. We'd have nice conversations who held this view, and I, to this day, think they're just dead wrong. But it's one of the hardest views you can look at just because of how that argumentation goes. All right, final questions on this one before we go to the next one?
The problem is it happens to so many people.
It happens all the time. That's right. You know, I don't know what the polls would say as to the reasons for divorce, but I would imagine adultery is really, really high on the list. There's a lot of that goes on. Somebody else? Yeah.
So the man has been born. The man decides to do the woman's been thinking.
Yeah. Okay, you saved that question. All right, that's the third one. Okay, that's the third. But in this particular situation, what you have is he divorces her even though he didn't have a right to. He's the one who committed the adultery. She obviously, according to Matthew 19, could put him away and marry another. But
I'm sorry to interrupt.
okay.
You just said that there is adultery in this situation?
My understanding is that it's not.
Okay, no, that's after the put away and a remarriage. That's once she puts him away, here's the argument, that they're no longer bound and therefore he could not commit adultery by a remarriage.
So pre-divorce.
Pre-divorce.
There's no adultery in this situation.
Well, yeah, of course, his adultery.
I don't think that can be logical. She could remarry if that's the case. That's right.
If there's adultery on the man's part before this, the woman can remarry.
Yes.
That's not what it said.
What did I say? Sorry.
We don't have to go through what you
Okay. Thank you. It's not what I meant. Ding. Exactly. Thank you for the correction of whatever dumb thing I said. You know, so, I know you are at all times, and I greatly appreciate it. What would I do without Adam? I tell you. Love it. Yeah, I'm going to start again. Forget it. I don't want to start again. I'll get confused. There we go. All right, here's the next one. This is the one I was talking about that began getting some traction around the mid-1980s. So here's the argument. The idea being that the words of Matthew 19:9 should be understood more literally. The combination of a man divorcing his wife and then marrying, we're talking about marriage ceremony, marrying is adultery. The actual marriage of saying, I commit now to this new person is a violation of the covenant, and violations of covenant is defined now as, in a more broader sense, as adultery. In other words, I call it the non-sexual adultery view. So, I have had, I know you're confused. Okay, let's just step it through because this is really, really weird. All right. So you have a couple. The man says, I'm fed up with my wife. I don't want to be married to anymore. He files for divorce because he's in love with another woman. And he goes and after he's divorced, he goes to the second woman and he says, let's get married. And so they stand before the altar, whatever you want to call it, and they exchange vows. The moment he says, I do, he's committed adultery. Because there's been a divorce and then he got married. I'm not talking about afterwards. We're talking about he got married. And the moment he said, I do, that was the adultery. It's a figurative way of looking at adultery.
So I think it's that same issue applies in Christmas. It's important to say, pre-divorce, was there any adultery?
No.
Okay. So in this case, they get divorced, man's just putting her away because he's decided
You want to see the other one?
So he's had no sexual contact.
Wouldn't matter, but that's right. In these people's view, it wouldn't matter, but that's right.
Just trying to make sure we all
Okay, good.
And then gets married. Still been no adultery.
There's still been no sexual relations, exactly. That's right. No intimacy has taken place yet. And then when he says, I do, and she says, I do, boom, adultery has been committed. That's the view here. All right? So how would you go about convincing somebody of that view? Let me show you how they would argue this. And I'm quoting, folks, and this has been presented to me many times, not by one person, by many different ones who hold the view. Here's what they'll say to you. Let's suppose a couple of 90 years old. I'm trying to make the age really, really old, okay? So let's suppose, let's make it really old. A couple of 98-year-olds decide to divorce their spouses and marry each other, but, they're way past age. They're like Abraham and Sarah. They're way past the age, and there's no intimacy here that's going on. They would say, do they commit adultery? And if you doubt it, they'll go, it says, whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery, and so they must have committed adultery, even though there's no sex in the situation.
No intimacy at 98? Lord, take me home.
That's right. No, that's right.
We don't have to delve into that.
No, we don't delve into that. When I was going over this, you'll appreciate this because of what Louis said. When I was going over this in Arkansas, give it to Arkansas. One of the guys goes, he tries to repeat what I said here. I didn't use the age. I just said a couple of older people, and he goes, so let me get this straight. A couple of 65-year-olds, get remarried and they can't, and one of the elders went, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you, make it older. We were breathless. I mean, we were absolutely breathless. It was just too much. At any rate, so this is the way they try to argue that. And thus, adultery spoken of by Jesus is figurative, just like Israel with idols, not a literal sexual relationship, but a cheating with somebody with an idol as opposed to God. Adultery then is violating the covenant and making another covenant. Not sexual now. It's violating the covenant, making another covenant, and thus adultery is committed in agreeing to the new marriage, after which there is no adultery. Okay, catch that? Adultery is committed when we said I do. The wedding night is not adultery. Everything's free and clear from that time on. Yes. Jesus is not talking about, again, the sexual relationship. I have had at least 2 different churches that I held meetings for, both of them out in California, where I just off the cuff mentioned Matthew 19:9. I didn't even get into it of just talking about difference between Old Testament and New Testament and what Jesus said as compared to how people have used the Old Testament. And both times a lady came up to me afterwards and said, "I'm really confused. Do you actually believe adultery is sexual?" And I went, "Has been all my life, and I think Webster says so too. What are you talking about?" That was how she had been taught. And I knew the preachers who had taught her that way. So it was just foreign, yeah.
So, are people using the example of the 90-year-olds to then say something is fine?
Yes.
The example?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what would be one of my arguments as we get to it. You can't make up a marriage that is an exception to the rule, for one thing, and then turn around and apply it to marriages that would be obviously more than what is being said there. Yeah, John.
I must be missing something. What are they trying to achieve with this argument?
Well, they're trying to achieve this. That's really pretty simple. You explain what they're trying to achieve, Brian?
Yeah, I think an easy, for me, an easy way to understand this, and I understand this correctly, is, because I've heard this before, divorce in and of itself is lawful. It's the remarrying that is the sin and the wrongdoing.
Okay.
So you can divorce.
They would probably not say that. They would say it was sinful for you to divorce. It is sinful for you to make a new covenant in a marriage. What they're saying is, after that, the relationship is fine, it's pure. You've sinned twice. You need to repent of those sins, get forgiveness of divorcing and getting forgiveness of remarrying, of saying I do to a new marriage. But your relationship after that is fine. So you can see the advantage. The advantage is you run into a couple who's unlawfully been divorced and remarried. Well, do they have to separate? Well, no, because what they're living in right now is not adultery, because adultery is not sexual in this situation. One older preacher said to me when this view came up, he goes, "Oh, so in Matthew 5:27, when I lust after a woman, I'm just wanting to say I do with her." I about fell over. That's okay. there you go. That kind of thing. So the argument is based on believing that Jesus' use of adultery is figurative, not literal sexual relations. Here's the major problem with that, and it's context. In the context, what's he talk about? He talks about being a eunuch. He's obviously talking sexually. He talks about becoming one flesh. Marriage is obviously sexual in this. Whether the original marriage or the remarriage is obviously sexual. This is not a non-sexual sin that is being used here. They use the word marry as if it's only referring to the ceremony. No one thinks that way. Jesus isn't thinking that way. Marriage includes everything that's involved in marriage. All the things that marriage is about is included in this word marry. So he's not saying whoever divorces and signs a new marriage license is committing adultery. He's talking about marriage in the sense of what's going on. So if you're going to define marriage by an older couple getting married without intimacy, you have made a use of the word marriage that is not the normal use, and certainly not the use that Jesus is using it here in this particular context. And not what you're planning to do. That's exactly right. Okay, Wayne.
Is it important to understand that marriage hasn't always been like it is? You go to a judge and get married. In Israel, marriage, there may not be a ceremony. You were married if you had a relationship, a sexual relationship with a person.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't, excuse me, if you didn't already have a wife or a spouse, you were required to marry and never divorced.
And when it talks about marriage being betrothed, then I don't really understand if there's ceremonies after that before they.
Well, there are. They had in fact a 7-day marriage feast, and there were certainly ceremonies. It's different than what we do today, but there certainly were. So here is the bottom line: adultery, even when used in a figurative sense, is making a play on the sexual relationship, and it's easy to prove that when you look at Hosea chapter 1 and chapter 2 and Ezekiel 16. God is extremely detailed about the sexual relationship that takes place in a marriage or in an affair, as Hosea's wife had and as Israel had with the idols, or in Ezekiel 16 as Judah had with his idols, the nation with its idols. So in both cases, this is the way that is used in Scripture, and it's just really impossible to get around that. But that, again, is something you don't want to get blindsided by, because, again, that has been taught a lot. So here's what the bottom line is, and this is what I said to the fellow I spent 3 days with. I said, so it's sinful to marry her and lawful to keep her. So every morning you wake up and say, honey, I have to repent of marrying you. I'm sure glad we're married. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. He could never get over that particular argument. But he kept he kept his view. He didn't give up on it and continued to teach it all over the Pacific Northwest in that way. All right, final one. We got about 5-6 minutes here. And here's the one that I think Louis was talking about here. If a man who is committing fornication files for divorce against his wife and puts her away, does she have a right to then put him away for fornication and remarry? All right. So a lot of you would probably nod your head, yes. Yes, okay. Here's the way that's argued. It's argued from the point of view, well, now you're the one who's been put away. What are you doing? You can't put away because it's already happened. So since he's put you away, you're the put away party, quote unquote. You're the one who's been put away. And what does Matthew 5 say? Whoever marries the one put away commits adultery. And therefore, since you've been put away, even though you weren't the one committing adultery, you've been put away. So since you've been put away, then you cannot remarry. Shockaroo. Yeah?
The grammar in this says it's very.
Okay, sorry.
So, the man commits fornication.
And files a divorce against his wife.
So, she would have the right to remarry.
Well, you would typically say that, yes. But not in this case. Not in what they're saying.
Their argument is she doesn't have a right.
Their argument is that she doesn't have a right to remarry because she got put away. He beat her to the courthouse.
Yeah, this is the race to the courthouse.
It's the race to the courthouse. There you go, Danny. You heard it.
Or even still, the man or the woman didn't know the man was having an affair. They get divorced.
Okay, back to my actual situation. The man had been having an affair for 8 years, walks in one evening after work and says, I've already filed for a divorce. I've been having an affair for 8 years, and now she's stuck. She cannot divorce him because she's already been divorced. Oh, I tell you what. Yeah, that argument is made, and you're going to have a bit of a challenge when you try to to work on this. Because here's what the argument will be. If she tries to put him away, how are you defining that? And here's what it's called, mental putting away. It's not an actual filing or anything like that. In most states nowadays, I don't think there's any state that allows you to countersue or something of that nature. So you've been put away. Too bad. It's the way that goes. All right. So that's how that argument is used. All right. Here's basically their view in one sentence. Since she's been put away, whoever marries the one put away commits adultery, quoting Matthew 5:32, then she cannot remarry. All right? So that's the idea. Here's some of my problems with that view. First off, an innocent mate then must not show any mercy or compassion or patience if he or she has the slightest inclination or idea that his or her spouse is having an affair. You better run, not walk, to the courthouse and file quickly, because if they do before you. Another real life situation. A man has been suspecting for months that his wife is having an affair, cannot prove it, begins to go through her drawers looking for any evidence, finds papers, divorce papers, not yet filled out. He has been having patience with her. He has been trying to save her. He's been trying to save the marriage. Even when he finds out that it is for sure, he's still having patience to save the marriage. He has compassion on this. He wants to save it. She runs down, files a divorce. Too bad you lost. What that does is, I would go to Hosea 6, verse 6, as Jesus quoted twice. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So that's crazy. You would be putting an innocent party in the position of absolutely not wanting to have any compassion or patience or hopefully repentance from the spouse in order to save the marriage. Just run down and dump her as quickly as you can. That would be the end result of that. And I just think that is just so anti what God would say there. Did you have?
I don't know if this is what the problem is, but I think logically, if I understand the situation in Matthew 5, men have the right to put away wives. Wives did not have the right to put away
Under Jewish law, yeah.
the Jewish law. So, essentially, that would be saying, comparatively with what Jesus was talking about, that made it basically impossible for a woman to ever have any rights at all.
Now, under Jewish law, she would all. Yeah, that's right. She never got to the courthouse. Yeah, exactly right. So she would just be nullified. Of course, Mark's account turns it around and actually says if a woman puts away her husband. So obviously Jesus uses the other side. But yeah, under Jewish law, that would make that quite weird. So here's one of my questions is, by what authority can the guilty put away? God never gave him authority to do anything. I don't care what he does with the law of the land. What makes him have a right to do that? This is the law of the land. You're talking about the law of the land. You're not talking about God's law. God's law never gave him a right to do that. And he isn't in that position. But she, the one innocent, would certainly have a right to. Plus, we got to consider the spirit of the command here. The spirit of the command is that one's spouse who commits fornication, that person has a right to put away and remarry. Doesn't matter what this other person tries to do. We're trying to save a marriage here, and that is. But I have had gone toe to toe with some preachers on this. Nope. He or she is stuck when that takes place. Our laws allow all kinds of things that were not allowed in the first century, and Jesus isn't going to try to address in the future, every single little nuance that some government like the United States of America comes up with. Used to, the United States had the same law that God's law was. You had one cause, and you had to be on the papers. New York, in fact, was one of the last ones to get rid of that. Most were just no fault. That's just the way it is. And then I would, if we're going to get that detailed, do you have to have for the cause of fornication on the divorce papers to have a right to remarry? Well, you can't do that anymore. You can't do it in Tennessee. You can't do it in California. You can't do it in most states. They won't let you do it. It's just like, no, you just say irreconcilable differences, and that's that. So it's not even on the papers. Well, does that mean the person innocent can't remarry because it wasn't on the papers? Are you still married if your marriage certificate got burned up in a fire? Just get ridiculous there. Yeah, Dan. Yeah.
Even before the law was that way, you would have had a hard time finding a lawyer that would give you
Yeah.
the written on the paper.
Right. Try to get that.
You would have to go to court with pictures and
Yeah, that's right.
documentation.
Yeah. No circumstantial evidence. Yeah, that's right.
The argument they would use is that you don't want these children
Right.
to be hung with
Yeah. This kind of thing. Exactly. Anyway, that's one of those views that goes round and round, and oftentimes it becomes again a problem in churches. I'll tell you, just in conclusion here on this, I think that's the last. Yeah, just in conclusion here on this, when I'm talking sometimes to couples who may have been in certain situations, there's a lot of times it isn't real clean. And I'll give you one quick example, if you don't mind, a 60-second example. One of the early situations that I dealt with, a man had, before he became a Christian, he was married, and he went on a Westpac in San Diego. That's 6 months at sea with the Navy. He went on a Westpac while he was married, and during those 6 months, 2 different times he went into a port and he committed adultery. All right? And on the way back home, as the ship is coming back home, he was struck deeply of the guilt of what he is. He's not a Christian, but he was struck deeply with his guilt. As he came back home, he asked God repeatedly to forgive him, decided he would not tell his wife anything about it. He didn't want to mess up his marriage, so he said nothing. 3 months after he got home, he came home from work one day, and there was a note on the refrigerator from his wife which said, I'm done, I'm divorcing you, and I've run off with Bob. And he spent the next year trying to save his marriage and never could. And eventually was converted by a woman, and they got married, and he had 1 child and another on the way. Okay, is that some scrambled eggs for you? He looked at me and said, what do I do? And I said, well, would you feel absolutely confident that you were doing the right thing by leaving your present wife and children? No. I said, would you feel absolutely confident if you stayed with your wife and children? He says, not really. I said, yeah, I think I'd feel just about the same way. But the thing of it is, when you actually answer the question, what caused that divorce? It was her desertion to somebody else and fornication. I said, this is just me, but I would probably look at it from the standpoint, if I'm going to be uncomfortable either way, I might as well be uncomfortable and stay as uncomfortable and leave. I only bring that up, no matter what your view might be on that. That's not the point here. The point is, you see a lot of scrambled situations, and I think it right for a church not to get into the business of being able to be the CIA and judge for Christ. You're going to have those situations. You've just got to go, here's what the Scripture says. You have to figure it out. Much different than when a person just comes to me and said, well, I left my mate for somebody else, and we're married now, and whatever, and I'm just going to read a Matthew 19:9 and go, that's adultery. That's pretty cut and dried. But there's some of these other situations, and I could list 10 more, that you kind of go, ooh, what about that? And even though at some point sexual relations took place, but you're going, hard to, well, I'm not the judge anybody. I'm just supposed to show you the scriptures, and hopefully you come to the right conclusion. And as long as you're confident that you're fitting those scriptures, then I think it's wrong for a church to try to get into parsing that out. Anyway, that's my deal. All right, we're done with that particular series. I wanted to get you aware of some of those things. You can give some thought to it. Maybe there's other questions we could talk about privately if you want to talk about that as well. We're going to sing a song right now, and glad to, of course, help anybody who might find a need that you would like to present before us or talk to us afterward as we stand and sing here.